up, Badlands? Explain those Badlands. That's a hell of a name.
Okay, welcome everybody to this very, very broken, unfortunate episode of Movie Nights with Matt. This has been a very, very choppy introduction, and I do most sincerely apologize for this very, very technical, difficulty-ridden introduction, and I hope people are still hanging on there who might not have given up on this broadcast. I'm hoping that I can be heard. I literally just stole Cynthia's computer, so we will be watching a movie today, as promised. However, it won't be the movie that I had planned and that I had announced last week, which was originally, for those who recollect, episode 1 of The Hidden Hand Behind UFOs. Cynthia got a little bit of a cold, so we're going to put that off till next week, where we will launch into The Hidden Hand Behind UFO series, because for obvious reasons, the issue of PSYOPs, the reset of world religions around a new global UFO cult, has been a long-standing project run by the CIA, MI6, Tavistokian social engineers for a very long time to create a new sort of global religious order, again, based upon ETs and other things. So that we will deal with that, and it is accelerating fast. So we got to really nip that in the bud. However, we did have a robust conversation with the audience last week over the issue of the culture and how the culture is the battleground. The battleground is really located in who is shaping the thing that shapes the development of the minds and the souls of the people living in a society, and their ability to discern right from wrong, good from evil, beauty from ugliness. And so I'm going to introduce people to a friend of mine who I've been working with now since 2009. who is the author and the film producer of the film we are going to watch tonight. I'm going to briefly just introduce David Gosselin.
Ability to discern right
David,
from wrong,
are you
good
still
from
there?
evil,
Hey, how you
beauty
doing?
from ugliness.
Okay, David can't hear me, so let me take off David. Okay, the technical difficulties don't end. So what we'll do, we're going to play the movie. I'm going to then run a couple of ads, and then we're going to have a quick dialogue with David and hopefully also a poet, Daniel Leach, who is the author of the poem Devil at Woodstock, which inspired the film you're about to watch. It's about 56 minutes. Afterwards, when the film is done, I'm going to make the link to watch it online available so everyone can watch and share it with your friends and colleagues. Obviously, it's going to tackle some very difficult material, especially difficult for people who might have lived through the events of Woodstock and surrounding Woodstock, and might be coming to realize that it wasn't what you thought it was. There were darker, insidious forces at play that people are finally realizing have a lot to do with how our society allowed itself to get steered like sheep into some very bad places. So there is always time for redemption, but we got to look at the truth, even if it's ugly, and have a sense of the beauty that we can now find if we just recognize the problem. So with that said, I will quickly make a transition to, and now that I'm on a new computer, I just realized I don't have any of my windows up, so I have to go and find the thing yet again, which I'm doing right now. And here it is. So I pulled up the documentary, and now we are going to do a little screen share. Actually, before I do that, I'm going to give Dave one last chance. We're going to test out Dave one more time. Dave, can you hear me?
I can hear you.
And I can hear you, Dave. That's good. That's good. Okay.
There's a bit of a lag, I think, for my computer for StreamYard. I'm not sure. That's why I tried on my phone, but we'll figure it out. Do you hear me fine?
We'll figure it out
the whole time.
Okay. All right. So I just want to make sure that you're going to be ready to roll as soon as this film is finished. And for those watching online, get your questions out. I'm going to try to pay attention to the comment section as best as I can. And any good comments, good questions, I will throw at Dave and or Dan Leach when he comes towards the end of the broadcast. So I'll take you off, Dave, and I'll talk to you soon. Oops. Why is nothing working? We can do this. Okay, we're going to do a little test here. People are going to tell me in the chat box, can you hear the sound that is going to be coming through from this video right now? Okay, I'm hearing people say that there is no audio that they can hear. Okay. Oops. Okay, so I've just heard people say that there is no audio that they can hear, and they could see the video, but they can't hear the audio. So what we can do in this case is try to fix this again, and it will be done. It will work. It says also allow access to the audio in the tab, certainly. So we're going to try this again. Okay, we've just collected yes to the audio. Share. Okay, we're going to go for it again. So we're going to hit play right now. Hey, Do people hear that? No audio. No audio. All right, Dave. So there is nothing that I could seem to do to fix this problem, unfortunately. So how about we change gears a little bit? As you can see, I've been running up and down the house from computer to computer to try to make things work, and it's not working out. David, are you able to share your screen from your
You're talking to me now.
That power? Because if not, then what we can do is just talk a little bit about your.
I don't know. I should.
No. Okay.
Okay. Yeah, but hang on. Thing is, we should do it. Can you hear me?
I can hear you just fine.
Just call me. Okay.
I have no phone.
My computer here it lags a bit. Why? Okay. Yeah, no, I can't stream from my computer. I don't think it's a good idea. With StreamYard is tricky. StreamYard it's so I don't want to try that on my computer.
Okay. All right. So how about we do that?
But hang on. Like even when you were trying to make it play, I didn't see any video. So you were asking us if we can hear something, but there was nothing playing on the screen.
Well, the problem is there was. It was playing on my screen. There was a screen share. All of that was good, but it was just not showing the video or the audio. So, I don't know what else to do, right? Like I could do
well, here you just want to try
like I just did right there, and then I could hit play with the showing of the sound, and yet you will not hear sound, right?
I don't even see you clicking like a play. I don't see a play button. I don't see anything.
Yeah, see, so on my screen, it is playing. Everything seems good. It appears to be good on my screen, but it's not. So we're going to abandon this idea, and we're going to just talk about the counterculture a little bit, all right?
Okay, well, the only other thing I was going to say is if you want to, we could just try right now. Like if you want to share screen, why don't I click play? And you tell me if you can see it. If that works, we'll just do that.
So you want to share your screen?
So.
Oh, so you're very choppy too. You're extremely choppy right now. So at this point, yeah, I can't even hear Dave. You're gone. So this is a fun one, guys. Dave, yeah, I don't know what happened, man. I can't even really hear you at this point. You're so choppy. So it's it's not looking great. It's a weird one. Yeah. So what, Dave, how about this? How about we just talk a little bit about your movie and about your method and what you were communicating, so we could talk a little bit about the culture. How about that?
Yeah, sure.
Okay, so basically, let's do it this way. Oh, you gotta. What's this? David Gosselin entered the studio. What's this? Why do you have a second? What is this?
Can you now hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you. Okay.
Yeah, so that's why I use my phone. There's usually never an issue. I think I was accidentally muted. So yeah, I mean, we can have a chat.
Yeah, let's do that.
Streaming's not working. I mean, people can go watch the documentary after. Maybe we'll say something provocative that will actually get people to want to see the doc.
Well,
And
let's
yeah,
do that. Yeah. And I'm going to make the documentary available in the chat box ASAP, so people could actually watch the whole thing, share it. Now, why did you call this thing "The Devil at Woodstock"? This thing came out about 2 months ago. It's a fantastic piece of work, but what made you make that choice? Because people think of Woodstock and they tend to think of light and life and peace and make love, not war. It has nothing to do with the devil. So what made you take that angle?
Well, it was adapted from our friend Daniel Leach's poem called "The Devil at Woodstock," which is a narrative poem. So it tells a first person story of a young man going to the Woodstock with his friends, and he encounters the devil among the crowds of Dionysian dancing and billows of pot, basically. So yeah, people on drugs, sort of, trying to transcend the world through music and love and inspiring change and all that. So I mean, that was the beginning of a lot of these this era of slogans, right? And the idea that like the way that you fight the man, you fight the machine, is kind of through this. It's like you need to liberate the world, the people's souls and minds, so that they can be free. And if they can fully express themselves, they won't accept the tyranny, right? And the kind of cold logic and formalism that forces people to fall in line, right? And just listen to the man, because otherwise, if you don't oppose the man, if you oppose the man, you're going to get in trouble. Your career is going to be in trouble and all that. So the idea was to reject all that and to protest. But what happens if you do that and you don't actually have an understanding of the system that you're trying to oppose, right? How it really works, the inner workings of the mind of Satan, if you will, right? Satan is crafty, right? He's quite subtle and he's tricky. So the poem just elaborates it's a tragedy. Technically, it's a prophecy. So it's set in the past in the 1960s, and it's telling a prophecy about what's going to happen. And the devil is the one telling him that prophecy. The devil is this androgynous figure watching everybody dancing from like a hilltop, and the poet Daniel Leach, the narrator, is conversing with him. And so we use that and we dramatize that, and then we go through the actual history of the 1960s, the emergence of the counterculture, using the research by Dave McGowan, author of Weird Scenes Inside the Canyon, the latest work from Tom O'Neill on Charles Manson and MK Ultra from his book Chaos, Charles Manson, the CIA and the Secret History of the 60s. And then we add in some original or some additional insights and it's done in a way that it's supposed to communicate in an original manner, something deeper about what went wrong with the culture.
Yeah.
But in a way that I think is also inspiring, right? Like you can't solve a problem unless you could put a name on it. Why are the boomers all crazy? Like, what's really wrong at a fundamental level?
Well, you can't say that the boomers are all crazy, Dave. Like that's because there's so many good baby boomers who actually made it through that and preserved their soul, right? There's a problem though amongst that generation that has been capitalized upon that we can't ignore. But what is it about like the weird scenes in Laurel Canyon? So like maybe you could go a little bit more in detail, because I know some people watching this have read David McGowan's book. I've read it. I love it. It's a classic. And I know you dedicated this film to David McGowan as well as Daniel Leach, who's interspliced reading aloud his poem in the middle of your narrative that you're piecing together. But David McGowan, who I think passed away something like in 2015 or 16, he did some exceptional research on the military industrial complex, the CIA, and cultural engineering. So could you maybe go through a little bit of like concrete case studies of what he brought to the surface that might surprise some people who might have some misconceptions, let's just say, about what caused the counterculture movement to begin with? Like, what was Laurel Canyon? What's up with that?
Yeah, I mean, we go into the history of the formation of some of the biggest rock bands of the 1960s, and a lot of lesser known facts, like who was the Lizard King really, right? Jim Morrison, who is one of the most iconic figures. Dave McGowan spends a good deal of time sort of pointing out a bunch of ironies and discrepancies in the official story of not only who these individuals were, but even how the bands were formed, right? If you listen to a lot of the kind of official what stories, documentaries, how was like Crosby, Stills, Nash and Young formed? How were the Doors formed? How did all this start? How was Laurel Canyon? How did this little sort of nondescript bucolic neighborhood in the 60s become the breeding ground for all the biggest rock bands, who a lot of the kids, right, from Jim Morrison to Frank Zappa, Mamas and the Papas, Papa John Phillips and all that, they all had ties to military industrial complex families. They were the children. They were the spawn of high-level military intelligence circles. So they were born in like Washington, or they're in Maryland and all these places, and yet they all somehow managed to end up in the same tiny little town, if you will, and they all start these bands. They all set up camp there. So what was it about that area? And then, I mean, for anyone who's not familiar with the book, McGowan also brings attention to the fact that there was a secret military laboratory and film studio where people like John Wayne, Marilyn Monroe all had top secret access to this laboratory called Lookout Mountain.
Yeah.
So once you start to go down that rabbit hole, that's what happened for Dave when he started doing the research. It's like, well, wait, none of this makes sense. You can't, like, we got to stop here. And then there's all sorts of discoveries that come about. So we went in a kind of fun and original way, revisiting some of these insights, adding new stuff in, going back to Huxley, going back to Leary. So there's a lot of fun stuff. Going back to the work of Dr. Sargent, who was who was the top MK Ultra psychiatrist that did a lot of the field work, actually profiling primitive tribes, studying Dionysian dance and the remnants of these kind of Dionysian cultures. And that formed a lot of the initial insights for understanding how behavior can be modified under different kind of in different, in an atmosphere of dance and song and Dionysian revel. Like, why did that stuff work? Why did voodoo rituals or evangelical demon tongue wagging, demon possession seances and stuff, what is it about these things? How do people undergo such radical change?
This was really thought through, right? Like, they had field teams of anthropologists and psychiatrists on the ground studying. That caught my attention. That really jarred me to realize that those who were building and wiring this whole thing that became the driving force of the counterculture weren't simply military intelligence, but they were also tied to things like Tavistock. They were anthropologists. They were working, I think you brought up Gregory Bateson before. They were actually doing work on, like you said, altered states, ecstatic states, where tribal people would lose themselves in certain types of repetitive rhythms and behavior that literally creates a disembodied out-of-body experience. And then they carried that information, that intelligence that they were gathering into how they would then create new standards of repetitive rhythms in music, new types of ritual partying that would then be promoted, where you just were induced to lose yourself completely. So could you say a little bit more about the whole Tavistockian angle in all of this? Because that's not even an American. This is all happening in America, but that's a British agency that seems to have its hand in a lot of this.
Yeah, I'll say something on that, and then what I realize I should mention as well, what we're talking about, the question of trance. A lot of work. I previously did a lot of work on the question of trance in terms of how do you induce trance hypnosis, right? We published a piece back in the day. You published my piece on trance warfare. So I like to think I coined the term trance warfare. I haven't seen anyone else use it. I think it works during COVID and the pandemic in terms of how sort of trance states were being induced in people through nudging and neurolinguistic programming. And I would go on to apply that kind of work, having read like Richard Bandler, the co-creator of neurolinguistic programming, and Gregory Bateson, and all these guys that were really into hypnosis, and studying the latest research from the MK Ultra breakthroughs by Tom O'Neill, and just seeing how that applies to culture. If we really want to understand culture on a high level, good and bad, right? That, why is this important when a lot of people think that we're kind of in an information war, right? Politics is information warfare and whatnot. But I would argue that it's not so much who has the most information, but it's also about culture and who's going to tell the better stories. Are the bad guys able to tell better stories? Or if you compare that with, say, a Plato, right, and his allegory of the cave, the images that the poets created and that the best tragedians or artists have created, the myth of the story of Adam and Eve, right? Why do these things have such a sort of perennial relevance for people? It's because they really strike a nerve, right? They sink into the deep structures of the psyche, and it's hard for people to shake that once they're confronted with these ideas, because there's something profound. And so I think that's where we need to get insight from culture in that way if we really want to win the quote information war, which is important in a political sphere, but there's more. And so understanding culture at this deeper level, I think, is the key, right? We know that the oligarchy understands this. They have an appreciation for culture, right? If you read Brave New World, what are the things that are not allowed, right? Shakespeare's not allowed. Schiller and these types of classical works are not allowed because they do something, they stir something, not just in your brain, right, but in your soul. And you have to wrestle with that once it's awakened. So if you want a quote unquote stable society, you can't have that hypnotic trance that everybody's in disrupted by beauty, by the sublime, by things that awaken the higher faculties.
Right. Well, I guess the thing is you'd want to probably, because you can't get people to just embrace ugliness. Nobody's going to do that. But what you can do probably is to replace the idea of beauty with something much more hedonistic and eros driven, so that the higher sense of the higher beauties that ennoble the soul and that give us better joy for being and pride for being a human being, which is made in the image of God, that higher beauty is then made unclear for people who only have exposure to the idea that love is eros, that beauty is hedonism. And I guess you had a lot of that stuff come in to the 1960s sort of paradigm, right? That was being carried forth by Morrison and company out of this scene.
Yeah, and I guess that now we can go into the Tavistock thing, because what is Tavistock really? What is their baseline sort of approach to psychology? It's Freudian analysis, right? So it's really this theory of eros and repression, and how imagery shapes our affect, our feelings and whatnot, the images in our psyche. And if you want to change people's psyches, if you want to change their identity, you have to start modifying these internal images and the feelings that we have towards them. And one of the big weapons becomes eros. And actually, and there's all sorts of crazy theories, right? So for Freud, the idea is real creativity, genius is really just the sublimation of eros. So it's just a sublimation of your primal animalistic instincts, that when you do that through some kind of ascetic or behaviors or deprivation, you're going to unlock this mystical creative power.
Right.
And that gets interesting, right? Because we could go into that for a while in terms of how this is used by everyone from, the Neoplatonists and Rosicrucians to all the bad guys, right? Because then that means there is this primordial eros or power that you can tap into, and that's going to give you superpowers in a sense. But all that to say, so for Tavistock, the idea was, how do you weaponize eros? Or that's not just Tavistock, but the idea of weaponizing these Freudian insights, as like, Bernays did and all that. There's other things you can do with it as well, right? Like if you turn that into a science of how do we elicit different states and drives in people, and then try and direct them in different ways, and through analysis you put people through different kinds of transformational and altered states, and what happens if you start to stack these states. So yeah, people can go through different identities. And so then fast forward to, if you want to affect some kind of behavior modification on a large scale, how do you do it? Mass culture, groups. So Tavistock pioneered group dynamics. So, and again, they're turning back to ancient insights, right? In terms of the kind of Dionysian revelry and stuff. It's not like these things were not known, but they were known in a kind of archaic and intuitive sense. But then how do you formalize this knowledge so that you can create new altered states? You can create new mass cultures by harnessing the power of groups. Throw in some music, throw in some drugs, throw in some sex. It's basically the kitchen sink approach, right? Literally throw everything at people, at the young people. And, what do you think happens? People are going to kind of go nuts, especially if they don't. A lot of these insights were not as known as they are today, right? In terms of, like, we know about MK Ultra and brainwashing. So imagine if you have no reference point for all these things, all these sophisticated measures that are being thrown at you in, it had never been done on that scale. And, you've got Elektra Records and MCA and all these different, you got the biggest record labels, you got the music, you have everything.
Right.
So evil has a lot of tools. But again, if we know the structure of the magic, if you will, then you can have a lot of that, but they're not that strong. If you actually,
I'm going to try one thing. I was playing around a little bit. Okay. Just bear with me. I'm going to try one thing out. Okay. I'm going to add something to the stage. I've added to the stage. Let me know if you hear anything right now. Okay.
A festival that changed the course of history forever.
No, you hear it?
Yeah.
Did other people hear that? I want to see if there's other people in the audience who just heard that film. Give me a sign of a yes if anybody is on their chat and can say that they heard the song, the film being played just now. Anybody? Okay, I'm getting no interactivity here from the audience. So if nobody heard that being played, okay. Yes, I heard it. I got a yes. Oh my God. And there's just enough time to do this. Dave, do you want to watch the movie?
Yeah, sure.
Let's watch a movie.
It's
All right, so
actually,
that was quite the preamble. So at this point, let me just go full back to the beginning properly here, and let's run The Devil at Woodstock.
Woodstock, a festival that changed the course of history forever. It brought together a new generation of music that crystallized the sound and slogans of an era. The stars were realigning. A new generation was emerging. Unfolding were earth-shaking events that couldn't be stopped by the smug conformity and perfect white picket fences of past generations. The Apollonian age of Pisces, characterized by militarism, intellectual formalism, and collective certainty, was to be supplanted by a new era of openness, self-discovery, and individual freedom. It was the coming of the age of Aquarius. No conspiracies were afoot. At least, so goes the official story.
We are in process of developing a whole series of techniques which will enable the controlling oligarchy, who have always existed and presumably always will exist, to get people actually to love their servitude. This is seems to me the ultimate in malevolent revolution, shall we say.
I was a mere 16 that summer day. We all piled up in a beat-up car and drove to Woodstock, for someplace we had been told that a great spectacle was to occur, an earth-shaking event where all the stars that lit a generation's sky would be together, like an astronomical alignment. All their energies would merge and give voice to the coming brighter dawn we all felt was awakening in those times.
What if Woodstock wasn't so much an event or a journey as an experiment? At the heart of this new movement was what's known as the counterculture. Crowds raved for peace and love and turned on, tuned in, and dropped out. But within the bowels of the military-industrial complex, a bold reimagining of the image of man in mass control was already well underway. The latest insights into systems theory, cybernetics, behavioral science, linguistics, neuroscience, psychiatry, anthropology, psychoanalysis were all being brought together. Instead of the more formalized spiritual traditions across the West, a new ecosystem of spiritual institutions was emerging. Theosophists and New Age gurus and psychedelic shamans were advocating for the unleashing of mankind's hidden human potential through the transformative power of experiential knowledge. In his final novel, The Island, Aldous Huxley presents a subtly different and more nuanced version of the original Soma culture depicted in his Brave New World. At the heart of this new system of control would be the goal of meeting mankind's deepest spiritual desires in the form of a new spiritual drug called moksha. The denizens of Huxley's utopian island of Pala have willingly rejected a world based on scientific, industrial, and material progress. And instead, the citizens of Pala have opted for spiritual progress and the mystical ascent to higher levels of consciousness. Of course, their self-actualization is underpinned by tantric meditation, psychedelic drugs, and free love open communities. The word mother as a noun has been eliminated. Mother is now only a verb practiced among open families. Children can freely leave their birth family and choose to join a new family system if they think they were mismatched. Like Brave New World and many influential novels, Huxley's final novel reflected ongoing conversations within the world of opinion-making, social engineering, and human control. One of the most influential thinkers and researchers collaborating with Huxley was none other than psychosurgery evangelist, Dr. William Sargent. Originally a psychiatrist at the Tavistock-related British military Maudsley Hospital, Sargent explored how various altered states of emotion could be induced in both ancient and modern man, using drugs, alcohol, torture, or even simply language and carefully framed imagery. Sargent traveled the world profiling various tribes and cultures to understand the seemingly magical transformations individuals experienced at the hands of shamans, priests, and faith healers. From Haitian voodoo rituals in which individuals found themselves possessed by spirits, to fundamentalist Christian preachers invoking visceral images of hellfire to instill in their flocks a healthy fear of God. Sargent observed that heightened emotional states could be used to artificially induce radical changes in belief and behavior, especially when augmented by magical rituals and spiritual spectacles. In one of his books, Sargent remarked, "From the Stone Age to Hitler, the Beatles, and modern pop culture, the brain of man has been constantly swayed by the same physiological techniques. Reason is dethroned. The normal brain computer is temporarily put out of action, and new ideas and beliefs are uncritically accepted. The mechanism is so powerful that while conducting this research into possession, trance, and faith healing in various parts of the world, I myself was sometimes affected by the techniques I was observing, even though I was on my guard against them." Sargent observed parallels between ancient rituals and, say, the mass hysteria and euphoria of the Beatles concert and other forms of mass culture. Many of and showed states of increased suggestibility at the end of a long and intense period of repetitive and monotonous dancing. They looked very much like fans of the Beatles or other pop groups after a long session of dancing. Not surprisingly, Sargent was a correspondent and collaborator with none other than Donald Ewan Cameron, who led some of the CIA's notorious MKUltra mind control experiments at McGill University's Allen Memorial Institute in Montreal, Canada. Cameron sought Sargent's advice regularly. In one instance, Sargent sent Cameron a note, reminding him that, "Whatever you manage in this field, I thought of it first."
If some kind of satisfaction, either direct or indirect, were found for the instinctive drives and the frustrations and miseries of normal life. And the two great methods which they used, but to both of which they applied the term catharsis, The first of them, historically, was the method of the Dionysian orgy and dance. Dionysus, in this context, was called Lucios, the liberator. And he did liberate these people who lived an extraordinarily miserable life if they were slaves, from a great deal of their sense of frustration and unhappiness by, first of all, giving them alcohol, and in the second place, encouraging these congregational dances. At a later period, the Dionysian rites seemed to lose their interest, but their place was taken by the Corybantic dances in honor of the Great Mother. And here there was a specifically therapeutic value was set upon these dances. For example, the people suffering from what we would now call anxiety syndromes or various types of neurosis were actually diagnosed by the way they responded to certain types of music. And in this way, one could judge what daimon or god was possessing them. And suitable dances and religious rites were then prescribed for them. And they worked off in this way.
And so we came to the appointed place and joined the thousands walking on the roads like pilgrims to some mystic holy shrine. And I became as if one of that throng and lost myself in that great surging crowd. And I saw many things bizarre and new, the wild profusion of free growing hair and every possible exotic state of hue of clothing or of nakedness, and people dancing mid the summer corn to waves of mystical hypnotic tones and odors of hashish and cannabis, which sweetly drifted over all that place, like incense from some ancient Doric rite.
Ultimately, Huxley and Sargent's research was based on a perverse understanding of humanity's innate hunger for transcendence, a desire to leap beyond the bounds of a finite world, to overcome its limitations, fear, suffering, and tragedy. The sleight of hand would come by way of substituting the desire for transcendence with new clever forms of escape.
Again, sat mute as merchants of that trade enslaved the beautiful Promethean fire of reason to their grim and violent ends. Yes, even as we blithely breathe the air of summer's freedom in those sunny fields, across the world, in steamy jungle hells, our brothers bled and died and went insane. And only last summer, our cities burned when the last one of those great prophets fell, and hatred, like a cataclysmic storm, loomed over the horizon of our lives.
Mankind has an innate desire to transcend. The poet Percy Bysshe Shelley described this longing as the desire of the moth for the star. Man was by his nature created to reach for a deeper truth, beyond his immediate grasp. This desire lies at the heart of everything mankind discovers when he lifts the hidden veil of beauty. As the poet Edgar Allan Poe once described, inspired by an ecstatic prescience of the glories beyond the grave, we struggle by multiform combinations among the things and thoughts of time to attain a portion of that loveliness whose very elements, perhaps, appertain to eternity alone. The struggle to apprehend the supernal loveliness, this struggle, on the part of souls fittingly constituted, has given to the world all that which it has ever been enabled at once to understand and to feel as poetic. This spark of immortality, which lies at the heart of man and reflects his own divine nature as being made in the image of his creator, lies at the heart of all our desires, argued C.S. Lewis. However, he cautioned his audiences. The books or the music in which we thought the beauty was located will betray us if we trusted them. It was not in them. It only came through them. What came through them was longing. These things, the beauty, the memory of our own past, are good images of what we really desire. But if they are mistaken for the thing itself, they turn into dumb idols. Because we are confronted by this ever-present desire in all facets of our lives, it becomes all too easy to mistake the shadows as images of the real thing. We might call evil that which seeks to snuff out or pervert the spark, whether through fear, terror, physical violence, or more sophisticated psychological and spiritual control.
For we were a new generation, born not for the narrow realm of ordered thought, the world of soulless men and cold machines, and empty phrases that no one believed, but piously repeated just the same, of gods who punished or rewarded men as they obeyed like herded sheep or not. No, we were born to be the golden ones, free from all law save what was in our hearts.
Although present within us from the earliest days of our conscious awakening, that doesn't preclude this ever-present desire from taking on darker forms, being misled or fed with strange and subversive substitutes. Perhaps one of the most insightful studies into the genesis of the hippie culture is the story of Charles Manson. While eclipsed by its later dark unraveling, the early days of the family and Charles Manson remain emblematic of the dark strains that can possess us, but even more importantly, of the experiments at the heart of the 1960s. But where did Manson get his ideas from anyways? Well, what if we told you he also got his ideas from a fiction book? In fact, it was one of the most popular science fiction novels ever written, Stranger in a Strange Land. As the New Republic's Jeet Heer notes in his article, Charles Manson's Science Fiction Roots, Manson won them with the doctrine of communal bonding. They would be a family and share in all things, including love. Manson's made-up religion was a cut-and-paste invention that borrowed from many sources. As the New York Times notes, Manson's philosophy was a, quote, idiosyncratic mix of Scientology, hippie anti-authoritarianism, Beatles lyrics, the Book of Revelation, and the writings of Hitler, end quote. But the sci-fi component was pronounced. Stranger in a Strange Land provided the Manson family with its rituals, water-sharing ceremonies, terminology, grokking, and promise of transcendence. Manson's followers hoped that, like the hero of Heinlein's novel, they would gain mystical powers. The dream of mind triumphing over matter was also the sales pitch of Dianetics. Heinlein's Stranger in a Strange Land recounts the story of a Martian messiah who preaches a gospel of free love and creates a new religion based on sacred rituals like water sharing and mystical practices like grokking. As the historian David McGowan notes in his Weird Scenes Inside the Canyon, Laurel Canyon, covert ops, and the dark heart of the hippie dream. Heinlein's best-known work is the novel Stranger in a Strange Land, which many in the Laurel Canyon scene found to be hugely influential. Ed Sanders has written, in The Family, that the book helped provide a theoretical basis for Manson's family. Charlie frequently used Strangeland terminology when addressing his flock, and he named his first family-born son Valentine Michael Manson in honor of the book's lead character. But the hippie counterculture were all about peace and love. Charles Manson and the family committed cold-blooded murders. What does one have to do with the other? Well, more than you think. Going back to the 1960s and MKUltra mind control programs, research into psychedelics and the creation of new cults and spiritual movements had been at the center of developing new ways of repatterning memories, self-image, and creating new group identities. While such techniques could have beneficial effects when used to revisit past traumas or a distorted self-image, their transformative effects make clear why MKUltra researchers took such interest in the use of psychedelics and the possibility of creating new multiple realities. As journalist Tom O'Neill recounts in his groundbreaking Chaos, Charles Manson, the CIA, and the Secret History of the 60s, psychedelics played an important role in the cultivation of the person of Charles Manson and the family. O'Neill found articles authored by some of the individuals responsible for treating Manson and his disciples. Research papers found in the Journal of Psychedelic Drugs, a journal belonging to the Haight-Ashbury Free Medical Clinic, where Manson was treated, describe the study of psychedelics and their effects on group dynamics. Neil recounts reading several articles authored by David Smith and his fellow researchers at the HAFMC. Notably, David Smith happened to be one of the clinicians regularly attending Manson and the family. O'Neill notes, one of these articles hoped to find out whether a dramatic drug-induced experience would have a lasting impact on the individual's personality. Another observed that feelings of frustrated anger led people to want to try LSD. Quote, "The soil from which the flower children arise," the author wrote, "is filled more with anger and aggression, thorns and thistles, rather than passion and petunias. Under emotional pressure, acid could induce images and sensations of anger or hate magnified into nightmarish proportions." O'Neill goes on to say that David Smith had studied these same phenomena, formulating an idea that he called the, quote, psychedelic syndrome, first articulated in 1967 or early 68. The gist was that acid, when taken by groups of like-minded people, led to a chronic LSD state that reinforced the interpretation of psychedelic reality. The more often the same group of friends dropped acid, the more they encouraged one another to adopt the worldview they discovered together on LSD, thus producing dramatic psychological changes. Usually the psychedelic syndrome was harmless, but regular LSD use could cause the emergence of a dramatic orientation to mysticism. From the early peace and love hippie days to its final kill on command unraveling, O'Neill detailed the many different stages of repatterning the family and its members underwent, especially thanks to psychedelic use. Naturally, these Huxley, Leary et al. Viewed psychedelics as one of the keys to repatterning Western civilization as a whole. In his autobiographical flashbacks, psychedelics guru and CIA collaborator, Harvard professor Dr. Timothy Leary, described his and Huxley's reflections on the obstacles standing in the way of a new age of enlightenment. Huxley explained to Leary that central to any fundamental transformation were new brain drugs. These brain drugs, mass-produced in the laboratories, will bring about vast changes in society. This will happen with or without you or me. All we can do is spread the word. The obstacle to this evolution, Timothy, is the Bible. Leary then reflected on the obstacles they encountered as they sought to flesh out their vision of a new enlightened religion. We had run up against the Judeo-Christian commitment to one God, one religion, one reality that has cursed Europe for centuries and America since our founding days. Drugs that open the mind to multiple realities inevitably lead to a polytheistic view of the universe. We sensed that the time for a new humanist religion based on intelligence, good-natured pluralism, and scientific paganism had arrived. Discussions of mind-altering drugs and their potential for mystical transformations and mind-opening experiences were made possible by Albert Hofmann. He was a Swiss chemist who synthesized lysergic acid diethylamide from the wheat fungus ergot and discovered its hallucinogenic properties in 1943. Hofmann would go on to pen The Road to Aloysius, unveiling the secret of the mysteries in 1978. He believed that ergot was the likely secret ingredient in the ancient pagan rites of the Eleusinian mysteries. New Age guru and member of the Theosophist Buddhist Lodge, Alan Watts, would be another key psychedelic proselytizer who originally introduced the Beat Generation and the Western world to the way of Zen, drawing on Eastern Tantric and Buddhist practices that emphasized transcending the duality of the Christian and classical Greek world. He would further advertise the potential for a new age and its psychedelic dimensions with works like The New Alchemy and The Joyous Cosmology. As occult researcher and New Age writer Jeffrey Kripal notes in Esalen, The Religion of No Religions, the official history of the Esalen Institute. As for Alan Watts's Joyous Cosmology, the subtitle alone suggests that the enlightenment of the body was quickly entering the chemical and even molecular and genetic levels through a kind of micro-mysticism. With Leary, moreover, who co-wrote the foreword to The Joyous Cosmology with his Harvard colleague Richard Alpert, it would not be long before an entire mysticism of DNA strands was set loose in the culture. A very small number of writers, artists, and intellectuals were transforming an entire generation. And they were doing it with what were essentially chemical spiritual tracks, infused more often than not with a kind of subtle reductionism of the sacred to the chemical. So we find the 1960s generation embracing a new ethos of turning on, tuning in, and dropping out, and opening the doors of perception. But what about the music? What do we really know about its origins? Surely, music remains one of the most intimate and authentic expressions of a people. Even if many of the ideas of the counterculture weren't directly conceived by the seas of rebellious youth sticking it to the man, surely they gave these ideas their quintessential sound and embodied what were otherwise just philosophical abstractions and flaky intellectualism. After all, even in Plato's time, the philosophers played a relatively minor role in shaping public opinion compared to the poets. The strains of the lyre and scenes of the hero could compel and capture an audience's imagination like nothing else. So maybe we should look to the great icons and songwriters of the 1960s, who were at the heart of shaping the sound of a generation. Well, this is where our story gets even weirder.
I had no idea that Laurel Canyon was actually the true birthplace, really, of the whole 60s counterculture, the music scene, the whole hippie flower child thing. So obviously most people, well, there's two major misconceptions that people have about hippie flower child, the whole countercultural movement in the 60s, which was the biggest countercultural movement in U.S. history. And the two misconceptions are, number one, that the hippies and the anti-war movement were one and the same, that they were synonymous, and that's clearly not true. That the anti-war movement was already well underway before the hippies appeared on the scene, and many of the original anti-war activists did not look on the hippies too kindly at all. In fact, I have quotes from people saying, "Where did these people come from? What is this, an intelligence operation?"
There were many revelations to me in this book, so let's start with the primary revelation, which was Lookout Mountain Laboratories. Tell us about that.
Lookout Mountain Laboratories was a top secret U.S. Air Force installation nestled up in Laurel Canyon, the existence of which remained unknown until fairly recently, even within the conspiracy community. Very few people seem to be aware of the existence of this facility, which remained operational at least through 1969 officially, and according to other sources, considerably beyond that, but certainly through 1969 during the peak years of the Laurel Canyon music scene, which was a very curious discovery, to say the least, to find that nestled right in the middle of this bucolic hippie commune, so to speak, was a highly classified military establishment that was in full operation. That doesn't really make a whole lot of sense because, like I say, this was a fully operational film studio that capable of doing everything in-house. They had, every animation department, editing facilities, film vaults, sound stages, everything to make a film from soup to nuts. And the problem.
Well, one of the strange things in the book that you mentioned is that people like John Wayne, Marilyn Monroe, these guys had ID passes. What were they doing there? Were they narrating things? Why would they need to be a part of this?
Yeah, some real heavyweights from Hollywood. Performers like Marilyn Monroe, John Wayne, as you mentioned. I think Jimmy Stewart, and very heavyweight filmmakers. I think John Ford and a couple others were involved. They had security clearance to work in this facility, and yet no one seems to know exactly what they did there.
While no one in 2025 would have trouble admitting that many of today's most celebrated pop acts are manufactured in the equivalent of music industry test tubes by savvy producers and money-hungry record labels, what about the seminal musical acts of the hippie generation? How much do we really know about their origins? Fortunately, groundbreaking research by historian David McGowan allows us to delve into the hidden history of the music that shaped a generation. This research leads us into a nondescript, bucolic neighborhood, once quietly tucked away in the Hollywood Hills. Laurel Canyon. One of the most iconic musical acts of the countercultural generation was none other than The Doors, a band whose name was inspired by Aldous Huxley's famous psychedelic Bible, The Doors of Perception. So what do we know about these iconic groups?
Got this strange covert military installation looming over Los Angeles. In Santa Monica, we have the Rand Corporation, another spooky entity. This all looms over LA and the burgeoning entertainment scene, which takes us to the real point of the story, which is the rock and roll that came out of Laurel Canyon. And certainly the most famous or enigmatic figure to emerge from that scene would have to be Jim Morrison, the Lizard King, the lead singer of The Doors. But he also had a very conspicuous father. Tell us a little bit about Jim and his father and their place in that strange saga.
Yeah, Jim was certainly a larger-than-life figure, to this day, very, very iconic figure. The curious thing about him is that his father was actually a very high-ranking Navy admiral, which that part was known prior to my work on this book. But what I discovered, which had not been previously reported, is that not just was he a Navy admiral, but he just happened to be the Navy admiral who oversaw the Gulf of Tonkin incident. He was the commanding officer of the ships involved in that notorious incident, which of course led immediately to the passage of the Tonkin Gulf Resolution, and then to the full-scale involvement of ground troops in Vietnam, and ultimately the deaths of some 60,000 Americans and countless millions of Vietnamese and Laotian and Cambodian people, all of which was a direct result of this so-called Tonkin Gulf incident, which Jim Morrison's father was a key figure, to say the least, in orchestrating that whole incident that quickly resulted in the U.S. being engulfed in a very, very bloody quagmire over there. And that happened just like within a year or so of the sun emerging on the Laurel Canyon Sunset Strip scene as this larger-than-life icon of the anti-war, peace movement crowds. By his own account, he had no musical training and had never viewed himself as a musician or singer-songwriter. And as you say, not long before he emerged as this figure that we see here, was a very much different Jim Morrison, very clean-cut, collegiate, almost unrecognizable. Seeing his father off as he was about to leave, I think sailed out of San Diego for the Gulf of Tonkin, and within a year, he had completely transformed himself physically and emerged as this rock star, just out of nowhere. I mean, it's just an amazing physical transformation and an amazing transformation from someone who had expressed no interest in music whatsoever to, just like overnight becoming this huge international star.
As McGowan notes, all four members of the group lacked previous band experience. Morrison and Manzarek, as noted, were film students. And drummer John Densmore and guitarist Robbie Krieger were recruited by Manzarek from his transcendental meditation class, which is, I guess, where one goes to find musicians to fill out one's band. That class, however, apparently lacked a bass player, so they did without, except for those times when they used session musicians and then claimed that they did without. McGowan notes how, despite having no musical training, Jim would have supposedly written all the lyrics for the Doors' most memorable songs before he joined the band. So here we have a guy who had never sang, who had never even conceived of the notion that he could open his mouth and make sounds come out, who couldn't play an instrument and had no interest in learning such a skill, and who had never much listened to music or been anywhere near a band, even just to watch one perform. And yet, he somehow emerged, virtually overnight, as a fully formed rock star who would quickly become an icon of his generation. Even more bizarrely, legend holds that he brought with him enough original songs to fill the first few Doors albums. Morrison did not, you see, do as other singer-songwriters do and pen the songs over the course of the band's career. Instead, he allegedly wrote them all at once, before the band was ever formed. As Jim once acknowledged in an interview, he was not a very prolific songwriter. Most of the songs I've written, I wrote in the very beginning, about 3 years ago. Even those who worked closest with the band were at times candid about its musicianship. As their own producer, often referred to as the fifth door, Paul Rothchild said, "The Doors weren't great live performers musically. They were exciting theatrically and kinetically, but as musicians, they didn't make it. There was too much inconsistency. There was too much bad music. Robbie would be horrendously out of tune with Ray. John would be missing cues. There was bad mic usage too, where you couldn't hear Jim at all." But who was Paul Rothchild? Well, as McGowan informs us, yet another curious character to take up residence in Laurel Canyon was producer Paul Rothchild, who played a key role in shaping the sound of both the Doors and Love. In June 1981, Sports Illustrated publisher Philip Howlett penned a short piece to introduce readers to new writer Bjarne Rostang. Born in Lincoln, New York, Rostang grew up in various places in Connecticut, where he attended what he recalls as even a dozen schools. "I got my BA and master's in English from the University of Connecticut," he says. "Then I did part of a PhD at the University of Washington before going into the Army Intelligence Corps in 1959. We had Paul Rothchild, who later became producer for The Doors, and Janis Joplin, just to give you some idea of what the unit was like." McGowan muses on one of those open secrets in the entertainment world. It was in all likelihood like countless other intelligence units designed to churn out shapers of public opinion, whether actors, novelists, newsmen, or in this case, sports writers and producers of popular music. It is quite shocking, of course, to learn that the handler of two of Laurel Canyon's most influential and groundbreaking bands had a background in intelligence work. Apparently, the search is still on for anyone of any prominence in the Laurel Canyon scene who didn't have direct connections to the intelligence community. In one of the recently published journals from the collected works of Jim Morrison, overseen by his sister Ann Morrison Schuning, Jim apparently wrote, quote, "End with fond goodbye and plans for future. Not an actor, writer, filmmaker," he wrote. "Which of myselves will be remembered? Goodbye, America. I love you." It appears that Jim, who never expressed a passion or interest in music before his sudden overnight transformation, had planned to return to his true passion, film, which is what he studied at UCLA. Who or what drew Jim into a completely different direction? We'll perhaps never know.
And they were much more than just musical superstars, because they I mean, they actually carried the music scene to a whole nother level, and
yeah, it became like a club.
It became huge. Record sales just skyrocketed between like 1960 and 1970. Music sales just skyrocketed. Musical stars just became huge, and they became much more than just rock stars. They became sort of these spokesmen and leaders for an entire generation of disaffected youth.
That some of the quintessential rock acts of the 1960s may have been manufactured and had questionable ties to military intelligence families and operators is one thing. But not all of them, right?
Almost all of these bands had within their family background military intelligence, some form of military ties, political ties. I'm going to name some of the bands out of Laurel Canyon because there's so many. The Byrds, The Doors, Buffalo Springfield, The Monkees, The Beach Boys, Steppenwolf, Love, Frank Zappa and the Mothers of Invention, The Turtles, The Mamas and the Papas, The Flying Burritos Brothers, The Eagles, America. There was the singer-songwriters, Jackson Browne, Joni Mitchell, James Taylor, Linda Ronstadt, Carole King. It's nuts.
Right down the line, you look at all the major characters from the LA music scene, the genesis of the hippie scene, and every damn one of them is from a military/intelligence background. Every one of them. I mean, Frank Zappa's dad was a chemist at the Edgewood Arsenal, for crying out loud. I mean, he was a chemical warfare technician at one of the most notorious facilities in the country. I mean, there's just all kinds of evil that has emanated from that place. I mean, anybody that's done any kind of conspiracy research knows, all about the Edgewood Arsenal, and that's where Frank Zappa's dad worked, and that's where Frank Zappa grew up and went to school. They actually lived in military housing on the base, and Frank attended the Edgewood School there. He was born, raised and educated at the Edgewood Arsenal, of all places. And he again became this, huge icon of the flower power generation. He was actually very right-wing, very authoritarian personality, described repeatedly as a control freak, as this very authoritarian type of guy. He was actually pro-war. He vigorously pro-capitalist. He actually boycotted some countries where he was asked to, invited to come on tour because he didn't agree with their politics. I mean, he was, by no stretch of the imagination was he a liberal or left-winger or, whatever you would associate with the, 60s counterculture. And yet there he was as a shining icon. In fact, he occupied with a home that was like a major meeting place, the old Tom Mix cabin, where anyone who was anyone in the mid to late 60s spent time at that cabin. I mean, he was sort of the godfather of Laurel Canyon for a while. And his background.
For love had long since vanished from their hearts. That puling, weak, and poisonous idea which plagued the world for 2 millennia, that all are destined to an equal worth, and with some innate sacredness are born. For it was never so in nature's realm, where strength and beauty are their own reward. And mankind, lacking this necessity, will never rise to all that he can be, terrible and beautiful in his might, conquering all the universe he sees.
But I always felt that they were set up to actually quash the anti-war movement, especially with all the drugs and Timothy Leary, tune in, drop out, and all of this. It was more like they were leading people down a path away from the anti-war movement to just get stoned and not give a damn.
Exactly. I mean, Leary said that explicitly. I mean, at one point he told a crowd that he told people, you want to know what to do about the Vietnam War? Just turn your back on it. Just forget about it. I mean, that was his advice. And if you look through the songbooks of these bands, you're not going to find a whole lot of overtly anti-war songs, what you find is promotion of the Leary agenda, the sex, drugs, and rock and roll, the turn on, tune in, drop out.
The revelation that culture is much more than a form of entertainment can be difficult to appreciate. Culture's effects on our society are as great as they are impossible to measure. Culture can be a tool or a weapon that shapes the political and social landscape we inhabit in ways that few, if any of us, fully understand. The idea that the sounds and images we grew up with were never really ours or our generations, or what we thought they were at all, but rather the creation of opinion makers, can be painful. And parting with our illusions is never easy. Then again, even in his times, over 2,000 years ago, Plato paid special attention to the poetry and music that brought to life the shadows on the cave walls of ancient Greek society. Plato recognized that the poems and songs of ancient Greece were essentially charms, shaping the inner life and emotional matrix of Greek civilization, largely through mesmerizing strains and captivating images. Then as today, most of us get our cues on how to think about something based on how we feel about it. And much of that is rooted in the culture, the music, the art, and images it proliferates. From ancient Greece until our modern times, arguably, not much has changed. Today we have music, memes, films, and social media. All play their part in the vast image-making machine that shapes our modern media and entertainment landscape. And just as Plato observed in his day, the images proliferated by the poets and artists throughout the culture could be revelatory, or they could be deceptive or misleading. They could heighten our awareness and awaken our higher faculties, or they could serve as pleasant forms of entertainment or distraction. In conclusion, evil, by its very nature, stakes its entire existence on the idea that people will always love their illusions more than truth or self-knowledge. It must necessarily invest great resources and energy to maintain a culture that lives and thrives off illusions. Admittedly, the difference between illusions and the real thing isn't obvious for any of us. While truth and self-knowledge can lead us to a discovery of true freedom, illusions are the prison we create of our own free choice. Evil is banking on the latter. Yay.
Voila. I can't hear if you're talking, Matt.
Yeah, I had myself on mute. Dave, that was absolutely extraordinary, and I'm so happy that we were able to play that for the audience, despite the 30 minutes of ongoing technical headache and glitches. And that was really quite the show. And I just noticed that Dan Leach is actually in the house, and we only have a few minutes now, unfortunately. But I'd like to introduce everybody here who just watched this piece of art. Really, I think this is really what to call it. It's not just a documentary. To the artist who inspired it, Daniel Leach. How you doing, my man? Hey. So this is a beautiful collaborative effort. I wish we had more time, and we got to do a follow-up because there's another show that's going to be coming online right after this, and we got off to a rough start. But I want to just thank you, Dan, for sparking the fire in Dave to go and turn this into what we just experienced. And I think it had to come through somebody like you who actually was there on the ground. For us younger folk who, for us at Woodstock and the whole process that you lived through is a bit more of an abstraction. We're getting the downstream consequences of it in some ways, but you were actually on the ground. You were there. And so you're not, what I love about your poem is that it's not a didactic, judgy thing. You're expressing the natural innocence of a young person just encountering this overwhelming tapestry of experiences, and then looking back, kind of realizing where those ironies and cracks were located that were showing perhaps an image of something a little bit more nefarious behind the scenes that nobody could have fully have known that at the time. But we always have second chances, right?
Yeah, and I must say, as a teenager, which I was when I went there, I mean, I fully embraced what the counterculture purported to represent. And I mean, I rejected that cultural paradigm in my early 20s when I became political, but it was only many years later, really probably 30 years later, when I was able to actually put my thoughts into a form of I originally thought maybe some kind of an essay, but then it has just occurred to me the image of an actual evil force that would delight in what that paradigm turned into, what that generation turned into, because it was clear to me in the 90s that the former counterculture members and the people who had been the political liberals had morphed, and now the process is fully complete, into people who actually embrace the most militant greed, the yuppie phenomenon on Wall Street, the forever wars. I mean, everything that they purported to be against, they began to embrace. And I think all the more passionately for how passionately they embrace the counterculture paradigm. And it just was puzzling, but yet somehow very lawful in my mind. So I thought I would just explore that in metaphorical form by creating this devil.
Yeah, absolutely. And I love the way that, Dave, you were able to just weave in, using Dave McGowan's work, again, the literal, like it's both metaphorical, but also when you look at the Dionysian the Dionysian rituals that were being consciously infused, that then tied directly into actual Satanists that were tied to Aleister Crowley's spawn, like L. Ron Hubbard, and the Manson operation, which is tied directly in so many ways to the Beach Boys. Like you got, I forget which, I think it was the lead singer of the Beach Boys who was housing members of the family, and Jack Nicholson was housing members of the family at his place. And you got all of these points of contact with something so unimaginably wicked. But let me ask you this, like, you guys are both active poets. You're in the present day, you're classical poets in the present day. what sort of remedies do you propose when you guys are interfacing with people, patriots from the culture, who might get a little, sad, a little blue to see some of their idols take a hit? What sort of approach do you have to edify, to provide for a communication of what a higher beauty looks like that they could aspire to and awaken within them? Dave, I'll throw it at you.
Oh, okay. Well, just in short, I mean, as we were saying right at the beginning, we're in an information war. Everybody knows there's all sorts of political warfare going on. But I think unless genuine culture is infused to that, that's going to be the Achilles heel, because people are not able to access, as you're saying, that deeper thing, right? They don't have a sense of the sublime, of what classical tragedy is, right, in real life, and how we overcome tragedy. And I think that's part of what great art is about, right? In the same way, this is kind of a tragedy. And that's how Dan Leach described the poem, which, again, people should go read in full. They can find it on Age of Muses as well. The process, the reason you would compose a tragedy, right? The reason that ancient Greeks would compose a tragedy is because you want people to see that played out on the stage in a visceral way, where it's like you see that and you're like, wow, you see it played out on the stage rather than you playing it out, or rather than the audience playing it out in real life. Yeah. You're like, oh, that's icky, right? There's a pretty complex set of feelings, right? You feel disgust, you feel kind of maybe horrified at a certain level, but there's also something sublime that comes through, and something beautiful, which is strange. It's like, how are all these things colliding? But it's because there's a certain power and awareness and accessing that deeper sense of the sublime in yourself that is awakened. And so you have agency, we have sovereignty, and we can appreciate all the kinds of things that are done to subvert that sovereignty, right? And keep people in these trance states where they don't really know what's going on. So I think all great art, really classical art, is about, rather than creating illusions, it's about tearing down illusions, right? Where the truth, which is eternal and it's always there, right? It's not going away. It can't be destroyed. The truth just emerges naturally on its own, right? We don't, I think Augustine has that quote, the truth is like a lion. You don't need to defend it. Just unchain it. It'll defend itself. And so I think art has a similar role to play.
And let me just say, because I have to go in about 3 minutes, I would urge everyone in this audience to tune in to the Rising Tide Foundation on December 28th. Matt has asked me to give a presentation really speaking to this very issue of the sublime, because this occurred to me that this is the universal quality, the capacity to experience the sublime is a universal quality embedded in the human psyche. It is what Schiller describes, and I'll talk about that a little bit, in non-religious terms, but is what religious people comprehend as the soul, the part of us which is immortal. And art that addresses that is the greatest art, because it has a effect on the human being that they might not even be aware of the way it's affecting their entire worldview, their actions, and everything else. But it has this wonderful quality of reminding us of our true humanity, which, in my mind, is the greatest weapon that we have to combat what this film just described. So we're going to explore that a little bit more. I've entitled it "The Sublime is Spiritual Warfare."
Yeah, I think that is a beautiful way of rounding out 2025 and spiritually equipping everybody for 2026, which looks like some storms are ahead, and we really need to be solid. And I really appreciate what you just said there. And you said, so anybody who wants to listen to Dan Leach's upcoming live presentation for the Rise and Tide Foundation, look into the comment section of this video. We've unfortunately run out of time today. There's another show with Gordon on the Book of Trump that's happening as we speak. So I'm hoping everybody goes and listens to Gordon right now. But go to the comment section. You can also find Dave Gosselin's New Liar magazine. Christmas is coming. It's a beautiful gift for your loved ones and friends and yourselves. It's right there behind David. Pick up a copy before Christmas. If you order it right now, it'll probably arrive in time. Dan Leach, his book will be available in, well, it is available already. A beautiful book of poetry, Voices on the Wind. Is that what I just called it? Yeah. Voices on the Wind, right? And I'll make that available in the chat box as well. And until then, I want everybody to really just chew on this, rewatch this film, share it with your friends and family. And by next Monday, I know last week I promised that we'd have certain technical glitches resolved, and that didn't work out. But I promise this time progress will be made for The Hidden Hand Behind UFOs, which will screen episode 1 with Cynthia Chung next Monday. Thank you, everybody, for tuning in for tonight's movie night. Thank you, Dan. Thank you, Dave.
Thanks, guys. See you soon.
Bye.
Thank you so much for joining us, and don't forget to hit the thumbs up on this video. And a special thank you to all of our advertising partners. Please remember to shift your dollars to support those businesses that support Badlands Media.